Oh, lovely.
Wood burner. Good. It's a shame we've got so much to talk about because you could have told us a bit more about that. How is it? Are you toasty warm?
I'm incredibly toasty warm. I've never been so toasty warm in the whole of my life. Magnificent.
So we've got a lot, and you've got a cup of tea. Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 11. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And in a week when Gavin's got his new wood burner, we also have an incredible amount of news to discuss. So I'm afraid we'll have to put the wood burner aside for today, because we have today, Mark and Gavin, Pope Francis's interview in the Jesuit magazine, America magazine. Archbishop Cordileone has been talking about sex and gender. He was interviewed for The Pillar, was it, I think, Mark, this week? Yeah, for The Pillar. Then you reported, Mark, on Father Rupnik for the Catholic Herald, and a case there about maybe some covering up of allegations of abuse. And we've also had news this week about a fall in ordinations. And there's also been the news that England is no longer a Catholic country.
Or Christian country.
Well, no, I'll scrap that.
Oh, it's been a long while since it wasn't.
yeah, okay, it's late. I'm tired. So
bring you the news from 1559.
Bang up to date. Christian, yes. Anyway, you get me. So let's begin, I think, if we can, Mark, with Pope Francis's recent interview for America magazine.
Well, it covered lots of ground, and I think it really gives you sort of an insight into the way that he thinks, which is useful. And again, it's this thing that we've talked about before of him. Like now, I don't know what you guys think, but the last week or two seems to me that there's been a real rowing back from the Vatican from all these wacky positions. You know, you had the Synod Twitter feed putting out pictures of women priests and LGBT stuff, and you know, ropes breaking over the church with liturgy and on the bad side, and you know, LGBT on the good side, and all this kind of really strange messaging. And all of a sudden, since we had the story where the German bishops had their ad limina, and then we had the two cardinals that we spoke about last time sort of deliver a slap on the wrist, everything seems to have calmed down, and everything seems to be a little bit more orthodox. So, and I think that was, you could see that in this interview, as well as, I mean, even things like the Vatican nativity scene, which has been the source of great derision over the last 7 years or so. Even that, where we had, like, I think, what was it? A priest said to me today that it was the High King of Angmar was one of the wise men in last year's nativity. So, and we had spacemen and all kinds of weird stuff. But this year seems much more back to normal. And I think that was echoed in this interview where, again, like Pope Francis, he wasn't let off the hook. You know, it was by America magazine. So it was a load of Jesuits, which is, I mean, in itself is worth talking about, because there's a lot of talk that he's packed the Vatican with Jesuits. Every time someone resigns from a dicastery, he seems to put another Jesuit in charge of the next thing. I went to a Jesuit school, so I'm well used to that sort of, you know, there are terms bandied around in the Catholic Church like Jesuitical, you know, and Jesuit tricks, and because the Jesuits are well known for being complex and, you know, once upon a time extremely erudite. I have to say St. Edmund Campion, you know, was a great hero of mine. But there's all that sort of shenanigans going on, and, you know, no one really knows what to make of it. So when he's interviewed by the Jesuits, you kind of expect it to be sympathetic, but they didn't let him off the hook, I have to say. They did push on the hard questions. He answered questions about abuse, racism, you know, like a broad spectrum of things. And, you know, his answers weren't too bad. I think the only sort of alarm bell that went off was on the abortion question, where he seemed to separate, I don't know if you guys saw it, he seemed to separate humanity from personhood, which goes against Evangelium Vitae and Donum Vitae, I think it is. It's the other one, as well as just, you know, what everyone has always sort of taught. But some of the discussion surrounding that since then has been that that some of the pro-choice people use this as an argument about personhood, and that he was trying to preempt that. I mean, I was sort of pushing back against that and saying, well, he wasn't speaking to any pro-abortion people. He was speaking to fellow Catholics. You think the least he could do would be clear on the Fifth Commandment, you know, on something that we all know is well documented. I don't think it's helpful, you know. One of the most interesting things was at the beginning, he was talking about the divisiveness in American politics, and the abortion issue. The conversation revolved around the way that he handled it, which is hugely controversial and links into a lot of the other things that we've sort of mentioned that we might talk about today. Like, for example, you've got President Biden and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who are both people who are very openly pro-abortion, and Pope Francis has made a point of welcoming them, and hugely controversially giving them Holy Communion, or, you know, like with Pelosi, Archbishop Cordileone said that she was to refrain from Holy Communion, and then the next thing she appeared in the Vatican with Pope Francis' knowledge and was given Holy Communion. So that was problematic, I think, is probably the best way of describing it.
I found this interview a real lights on moment, and actually a source of great relief to me. Like Mark, I thought the ambiguity over the language he used was a reflection of his take on American politics. And it was the way in which I thought he was improperly. I didn't agree with it at all, because I can't take anything other than a passionate pro-human being stand in the womb. So any diminution of that, for the sake of not losing Democrat Catholics, I found difficult, somewhere between difficult and reprehensible. But the thing that helped me immensely was that what I've been really afraid of is that the Pope has been used either as the engine of or as a stalking horse for Protestant progressive philosophical categories. And so to suddenly see his answers, albeit a bit eccentric, in response to the ordination of women, was just huge for me, because I suddenly thought, well, okay, this is great. Despite the German bishops, he's saying this is the question that is not open. It's not open. It's a closed question. And he gave some reasons. They could have been a bit more theologically astute, but they were good enough for the moment. Well, you know, this idea of the Petra, this is not the moment to run him down. I want to praise him, not run him down. So
yeah,
I was really grateful for that clarity, because this Gaia women priestess relativism stuff, once it gets going, we know exactly how it rolls, and it is almost the most dangerous thing that could happen to the church. So for the Pope to say we're not going down there was wonderful, particularly as a break on what the German Synodal Way was doing. And then I think I got the gay stuff. The gay stuff seems to me, which is also progressive, to be essentially a kind of private permissive area for him. For reasons we don't understand, he's very sympathetic. Who am I to judge? He gives time to gay activists, to people who are offering this highly, quote, pastoral ministry. The panic for me was that this was a completely progressive, seamless agenda that was going to roll through the Catholic Church. You know, Lord, where else can we go? Only you have the words of eternal life. If the Catholic Church goes down, you know, this is inconceivably problematic. But it isn't going to, because he's not a stalking horse for progressivism. He's simply, I think, a theologically compromised Pope over the gay issue, who has a number of rather permeable theological areas, abortion being one of them, but who understands that Catholicism is Catholicism, and he's not about to sow a whole load of seeds that will become self-contradictory within the magisterium. So to tell you the truth, this is almost one of the most hopeful weeks I've had since I became a Catholic, because I saw that what he was doing was a matter of personal, I thought, incoherent idiosyncrasy, and not a strategy that was going to blow us all away.
Yeah, I agree. And to be fair to Pope Francis, I think you said I'm pro-human being, and I think that was behind the choice of comments he made, because there are those who will talk about non-human persons. And so I think he was trying to get away from, and as Mark said, that maybe not be the right audience, but and clarity was needed. But I think maybe that was what he was trying to do, is to highlight the human being, to avoid those secular philosophers who are trying to identify those non-humans as persons. I thought that was very good. Mark, you've written about this on your blog, and I thought what else was interesting about this is that you say he explains the way the Holy Spirit acts is first to cause disorder, such as at Pentecost, and then to bring about harmony. And I thought that was quite telling as well about some of the
It's wrong. I'm glad David is shaking.
This is completely
wrong.
No, it was dreadful.
But don't you think that was an interesting revelation about his papacy? I mean,
totally. And that's what I was going to say. It'd be interesting to hear what you thought, Gavin, because I went for a pint with my Baptist mate last night, and we were talking about this. We were talking about, so they've got a very like Bible, traditional sort of Bible strategy, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know how it feeds through into the Baptist tradition, but so say, for example, with homosexuality, and he was saying so how do we preach the gospel to those people? He said, if you had, like, so I was telling him, that in the church there are lots of gay people who are part of the church, and there are brothers and sisters, and they're welcome as anyone else. But like all sins, like, no different than heterosexuals, and if you commit a sin, then you're expected to go to confession before you, and make sure that you're in a state of grace before you approach the Blessed Sacrament. It doesn't mean that you can't go into church. And we were talking about providing a space basically for people to hear the gospel. So people come to us, and if we just shut the door, if we just bar the door, then they're never going to hear the gospel. And so there has to be, while we maintain the Ten Commandments, or the like the outer boundary of what is acceptable and what is, so people know when we speak clearly about what's right and wrong. But at the end of the day, we provide a space for people to come in. And if you take what Pope Francis says about all these issues in the context of his going to the periphery stuff, that I really think that's probably what, like you can argue about whether it's successful. I think it's not. And it's about clear messaging when you're the pontiff. I think that's the big problem, really, with the whole pontificate. But to be honest, I can see that it seems to me that is what, in his muddled sort of confusing way, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, come on then, let's come in, let's have the discussion, let's talk about it. But we're at the point of the discussion now, would you agree, guys, where he seems to have gone, right, but this is what the magisterium says,
Yeah, which is great. I'm with Gavin. It's a good week. I'm going to use this moment, I'm afraid, because but it links on
30 seconds.
What? Gosh, you're pushing it. Go on, Gavin. 30.
He shouldn't have called the Holy Spirit it. We really have to take trouble to call the Holy Spirit he. You're quite right. It showed a psychological turn of mind, a kind of the sort of the jester, the trickster. Let's throw it up there. The Anglican would-be priestesses do something called messy church, where they bring all the kids in to make a mess, and then it seemed to me it was a pontifical version of Anglican priestess messy church. It's not necessary. We don't need to do that. I understand it. I forgive him, and I'm very glad he was aiming to resolve the whole matter with order. But it was a bit substandard.
Yeah. 28, well done. That brings us to Archbishop Cordileone, who, and this relates to this. So he was interviewed about sex and gender, and he was saying, actually, I'll read this verbatim, there's a consistency between Pope Francis' teaching on care for our common home and on gender theory. In each case, the physical dimension is gift from God, not a mere object to be made and remade according to our desires. And so I thought he was very good in his interview, Archbishop Cordileone, at making clear some of the things Pope Francis had been saying and relating them to these difficult questions. What did you think, Mark?
I'm sort of halfway through a blog on it, where the first comment that I made was, oh, if only we could get this sort of clarity of teaching from the Vatican at the moment, you know. And Cordileone is the master at this.
Yeah.
He's in the hub of homosexuality, San Francisco, in the USA, and yet he walks that line really carefully. He's very clear about what the church teaches, but he reaches out to people in a spirit of dialogue and an accompaniment without compromising. And yet I think he's the exemplar of the fact that you don't need to compromise to show agape, you know, to show love to our brothers and sisters. And he does it. I think in that interview, he explains that very, very well. The fact that it is loving to take this message of hope to the gospel and of the gospel to people, to our brothers and sisters. And that really is, I wonder if it's a lack of confidence in so many people, why they feel the need to compromise the message, because they don't really believe, you know, they're so keen to reach out to people in love that they're prepared to compromise it. The other point that was really interesting in that interview is the amount that he references Pope Francis. Did you notice that? And that is, this is a guy who's just been publicly slighted in a massive way by Pope Francis, because he put an interdict on Nancy Pelosi about the reception of Holy Communion. And Pope Francis basically went, you know, like publicly went behind his back and undermined him, which is, I mean, was horribly scandalous, I think, whatever way for the Pope to do. But it's his old ringing up parishioners trick, isn't it, and telling them that they didn't need to listen to their parish priest. So, like, that was it was interesting that he referenced him so much and so deferentially. He was accentuating his connection to Peter, I think, in that, wasn't he?
Mm.
I thought that to me, this issue about how much we compromise in order to get people to come close to the gospel is something that I think I feel very strongly about, because it's a law of diminishing returns. I think I remember one of my students who came to the chapel one Sunday morning on her first day at university, thinking it was a cinema, and she walked up the stairs just as the gospel was being read, and like St. Francis, she was converted on the spot. It didn't matter what we did or didn't do, whether her experiences were good or bad. The Holy Spirit pierced the heart, and that was it. What we have to do, I think, particularly over the gay thing, is we have to say, look, the 98% of people who are heterosexual are seriously disordered. We have disordered sexuality. So we're really not preaching to you and saying we're better, superior. We're just saying all of us need our sexuality sorting out. And the Christian journey is a journey of pilgrimage to Christ, where we ask him to continually work and operate on us in order to sanctify us. But there's no distinction between the heterosexual and homosexual. We're just disordered people. Now, if we say that with some kind of humility, you know, evangelism is one hungry person telling another hungry person where they can get some bread, then we avoid the superego pharisaical telling people how to run their lives. That's what we shouldn't do. And I think what people are trying to do is compromise on the truth in order to compensate for Pharisaism. Basically fix the Pharisaism. Let's just say we're all sinners, come with us to Christ, and let him sort us out. And we don't have to compromise, any of us, neither the straight nor the gay, on the truth. We only have to ask constantly for repentance. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Here I come, back to the sacraments.
Brilliantly said. Cordileone, I think, does it beautifully, because he says, so this is a quote I'm reading, the church's teachings on sexuality are profoundly protective, not punitive. Just look at the destruction that comes when we do not accept our sexuality as a gift from God to be used for God's purposes. We can look all around and see the suffering that comes when people do not discipline sexual desire and put it at the service of love. Broken homes, broken lives, fatherless boys and girls, abortion, not to mention rape, abuse, molestation, sex trafficking. The body count of the sexual revolution is large and growing, indeed exponentially. I mean, he hits the nail on the head there, doesn't he?
Very good.
And it's the medicine that the world needs at the moment, very much so.
Yeah, medicine, not judgment. Yes, that's very good.
Exactly that, both spot on. Yeah, brilliant. So recommend going to dig out that interview in the Pillar of Archbishop Cordileone. I think we'll move to two things that I think are related, which is the recent census and a drop in ordinations. They're at their lowest. I think part of the problem is, again, goes back to formation. And I think if we look at the culture, if you're told that your opinion trumps all, your opinion matters more than anything, how can you then be expected to sacrifice? So, you know, this sort of culture has been, over the past few decades, has been about you matter, it's your truth, it's your opinion. It's not being deferring or being reverent or saying, I've got a boss I need to listen to. There was a thing Simon Sinek did a few years ago, and he said millennials, they struggle to hold down jobs, because he said they go into a job and they say, oh, it's not fulfilling after 8 months, so they give up. And what you have is 30-year-olds who have had 10 different jobs. And it used to be that you'd have a job and you'd stick with it, and it'd be difficult and you'd wait and you'd be patient. And so I think that may be a little bit behind some of this, is this poor formation of the person and again, I hate to say it, I always do this, I'm bringing it back to Catholic schooling, is what does it mean to form a person? Because you're a man and a woman first before you're a banker or a lawyer or a doctor. And then that impacts then onto the priestly vocations and onto marriage breakup and so on. So it's that inability to sacrifice, because you're told from a young age, and increasingly so today, everything, you matter, your opinion, it's all about you, it's your truth. That's my little 2 pennies worth. What do you think? Gavin?
Which question, the ordinations or the census?
Yeah, so both. I mean, I've put them together because I think they're related. A drop in our Christian faith, a drop in vocations is, I've said how I think maybe they're related, but you can pull them apart.
Well, I'd like to treat them separately. To go to the one I know least about is ordinations. I think one of the I used to have a game when I was a student. It involved 3 teams: psychiatrists, lawyers, and priests. And I've forgotten which way around it was, but I think the psychiatrist jumped over the lawyer, but was vulnerable to the priest, and each of them had a different vulnerability and strategy. One of the reasons for the lack of vocations is we've lost any sense of the supernatural. The Mass is the most extraordinary thing conceivable in any aspect of human life, and to be a priest celebrating the Mass on behalf of both everything in time and space is simply the most astonishing vocation. But because the church, you know, if you have half or more of the church, I think it's the American church, is this sure, that doesn't believe in the Mass, then why would you want to be a priest? Why would you need to be? Why do we need priests in that case? You know, it's this quasi-Protestantism. So I think the first thing is that. The second thing I think is the appalling level of pastoral care in the Catholic Church. I mean, you've heard me say rude things about Anglicans. Well, let me tell you, Anglicans are really good with pastoral care. I'm very proud of the way in which Anglicans exercised it. They made lots of mistakes. They didn't do it very well, but they meant it. They tried it. I've always been aghast at the desert of human kindness and responsibility, particularly for clergy. And so I think experiencing a vocation to the priesthood today would be a very difficult thing, with this diminution of the supernatural and this absence of all the things you would need if you're going to go on this lonely journey as a celibate. You'd need some compensations, and the problem is, because there aren't any proper compensations, people have taken improper compensations, and that's one of the reasons why we have the difficulty we have. So that's my brief quick response to the lack of. I could make it personal, but probably we shouldn't. Move on to other things.
Mark?
Well, I think that's very interesting. I think that you're absolutely right to say, I've always thought that the guys I know one young priest who, when he came out of seminary, was, the way that he explained it, I mean, he did a year at the cathedral where they kept an eye on him or whatever, where he felt he was constantly, kicked in the nuts and told that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And then basically he was thrown the keys and left to get on with it somewhere, to be a spiritual father to 800 people or whatever. It's just, I'm constantly amazed at the courage of our priests. And yet, I know so many Catholic priests who are so joyful about it. And I think the answer is to look at the Norbertines in Peckham. and the beauty of the liturgy that they've got there, and the fun and fraternity that they share with each other. That's how it should, you know, I mean, that's how it should be. And then it's that joy is effusive, and you can recognize it. You know, you can recognize it in the parishioners, and you can recognize it in the community itself. So,
Mark, what can you say? Do you have any comment on where the vocations are coming from when you look at that report? So there's Westminster, there's Shrewsbury, there's well, some of them are higher than, and then
Salford were in the lead, which really surprised me. But I was, you know, I mean, they're in the lead if they had 3 or something like that. So there's like no one's setting the world alight. I think what's extraordinary is that if you look at the FSSP and the ICKSP, they've got more vocations than you know. If you align them with a diocese, I mean, they just make them look ridiculous. They've got 30 odd men a year going through. They can't finance it. And it just amazes me that we can't learn these lessons. You know, what does it mean to be a young man, like any young man, to be a soldier or a policeman or a doctor? It's sacrificial, isn't it? There's a sacrificial dimension to the priesthood.
Yeah.
And what we've got, unfortunately, I mean, we talked about the plenary meeting of our bishops and how utterly, you know, it's just make you despondent to listen to them waffling on about absolute rubbish. You know, it's all like going to the most boring admin meeting in the office that you've ever been to with the most uninspirational leaders. Who are they going to attract? I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work it out, do you? You know, like we can link this with the census. Then, with, you know, I did quite a scathing blog about Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, who basically had an opportunity. He was published in the Telegraph and did a piece. And honestly, when I clicked on it, I thought, oh, brilliant! The Archbishop of York. This is going to be a real thing about, you know, the decline of Christianity and what it's all about, and getting the message out there, the passion and the, you know, the fantastic truth about the Christian faith. Was it? No. He could have been opening a tin of beans and pouring it for all the energy and interest that there was in it. I mean, did you read it, Gary?
Oh, yes, I did. I liked your title, The Man Who Pretends to be Archbishop of York. I thought that was quite right.
Cheeky.
I mean, I'd like to say they're in denial, but it's not really in denial. It doesn't matter, because they see themselves as a thin pattern of spirituality spread across an indistinguishable body politic. So they don't care how thin it is. They're just there doing their thing. And I don't think they understand Christianity, and I don't think they understand secularism. I'm sorry to be patronizing. I don't mean to be, but it's really serious. So I wrote a rather stronger article than the man pretending to be Archbishop of York did. And I took 2 lessons from it. First of all, I think it's time that the Catholic Church woke up and decided it was going to be the established church in this country. First of all, the Anglicans do weird things with their figures. They try and count them all through the week because so few people go on Sundays. But it's down to 1% of the population in Anglican Church on a Sunday. And this makes the secularists very cross about the fact that the bishops have seats in the House of Lords. There won't be the time and the energy to unravel that. It's not going to be disestablished. But essentially, what the Catholic Church, which has been in awe of the establishment for all kinds of complicated reasons for far too long, the fact is, Anglicanism, for all it has some lovely points and some very good people and some quite holy people and some very beautiful hymns and poetry, it's derivative. It borrows the clothes and the structures of Catholicism and then fills them with a kind of Protestantism, and the mix doesn't really work. And anyway, it comprises of about 4 different spiritualities who are in a very difficult standoff coalition with each other. It's not a very good way of doing things, and it's lost its way. So now there is a space for a church that embodies the Christian character of the nation, and it should be the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church did it for 1,000 years. It built all the buildings, it did all the liturgies, it built all the hospitals, it set all the patterns for education. It did the whole template until it was a state robbery. Well, it should step back up and do that. And if the Catholic Church doesn't see it has responsibility to do it, it's really failing on the job. It's a very significant moment now, and the Catholics can either do the same thing as a man pretending to be Archbishop and say, oh, well, we're all going down quietly, it doesn't matter. This will be a slow evaporation. I don't need to worry about it. Or they can step up to the mark and fight. And the other reason they need to fight is because to go for the moment when you were in a majority to a minority in a democratic culture is really significant. All the ethics that matter, the stuff that brings coherence that Cordileone described, as opposed to destruction, which Cordileone described, they're all Christian ethics. And the only way we have a mandate to argue for them is if either we can prove they're better and or there are more of us, or we've just lost half the argument because there aren't more of us anymore. So that means we're going to have to work even harder to prove they work in the face of a self-deceptive hedonism. That's a very big uphill task. It's going to make life very difficult. But Tom Holland has been good at this next bit. He describes the National Secular Society and the new atheism as like a man sitting on a tree with a saw sawing the branch off, forgetting completely that he's going to fall to the ground because the tree is supporting the branch he's trying to cut off. There is no secular, humanist, new atheist agreed pattern for communal ethics. They're just not there. We've only got neo-paganism on one side and two kinds of brands of totalitarianism left and right on the other. And they're not very nice. Any of those are not very nice. And if we want to see just how unnice they are, look at the way that wokeism handles cancel culture. There is no forgiveness. There's no coming back. They can dig into your past 40 years ago, find one association, one remark, and you're out forever. What we have as Christians in terms of forgiveness and the dignity of the human person and the conscience, it's so precious and so enormous. And if we don't put it back into society, then we're going to find the end of this civilization is going to be a really very terrible affair. We've had the most appalling glimpses in the 20th century, both behind the Iron Curtain in Russia and behind the barbed wire of Auschwitz in Germany. We know what the totalitarianism looks like. Neo-paganism is not much fun either. So this is the moment not to do what the man pretending to be Archbishop of York did this week, but to say, we've just entered one of those tipping points that all the ecologists are terrified of. The reason they're going bananas and having their eyes pop out as they glue themselves to the M25 is because they think, I think wrongly, but they think that we've reached a tipping point. And if we have, it's a really, really serious matter. Well, ecologically, I don't think we have. Spiritually, we certainly have. And that's one of the reasons why we have to respond to this census with a clear-eyed determination to live the gospel and to preach the gospel and to share it as the very best of our predecessors did, because otherwise our civilization is going into darkness and taking our children and grandchildren with it.
Well, there was another symptom of that today when Sajid Javid stood up in the House of Commons and said, was arguing about the fact that so many young people are committing suicide now before the age of 30 or something like that.
Yeah.
And how you could not connect that to the census and the fact that if you remove all the meaning from life, if you remove all the beauty and the dignity and the purpose, what is there left? Your computer games, having sex with as many people as you can on a Friday night, throwing as much vodka down your neck, that's all that's left, isn't it?
I have to be as careful as I can. I get a number of opportunities to go on to say things on the media. One of the things I try and find a way of saying is, this mental illness amongst your children, how's it working out for you? Where do you think it came from? Because in my generation, when we supported the young with a structured security that they didn't like, they kicked against a great deal, but nonetheless we acted parentally in the right way by giving people the right safety in order to know which traces you could kick over and which you haven't. So now you've like Haight's wonderful book on the mollycoddling of the American mind. Now you've tried these other ways of getting rid of Christian ethics. How's it working out for you? With the not in the abortion rates, but the dreadful suicide rates, and the appalling degrees of mental health. And Trump's one can't talk about this triumphalistically because it's so absolutely terrible. But the whole trans thing is an outburst of very serious mental illness, and people can't even call it for what it is. And so the reason I feel so passionate about this is because we shouldn't have to be forced to defend Christian ethics as if they were some kind of repressive straitjacket. They're the stuff that keeps people from killing themselves and keeps our children relatively sane instead of what they are now. And once again, Christians have to find a way, I think, of trying to make a case for the ethics as protection. But, you know, Cordier was so right. Was it he? You know, medicine, not judgment. We're bringing medicine with these ethics. But if you don't have, if the Archbishop of York, or the man who pretends to be, you know, can't glimpse of it, well, you're not going to hear it from the Anglicans. You might still, with the Catechism, hear it from the Catholics.
Well, you hear it from us anyway. What terrifies me, and I think you really got to this point in your article in the Herald about this, Gavin, was the way that they're so desperate to rapidly deconstruct everything that has worked for us. I'm trying to think now, is it Oscar Hayek calls that the fatal conceit of our generation? That they've got, you know, they want to step over the steps of construction and structure that have allowed us to stand on the shoulders of giants and reach for the stars. And they think that they can do that without having to observe any of the rigor or restrictions or, you know, boundaries that every generation has worked for every generation before. They've got no discipline and no vision. They've got no understanding of why that's important. And they just want to deconstruct everything, and they've got no idea what they're going to put in place instead of it.
Which takes us back to what Catherine was saying about the millennials and Gen Z and incapacity to deliver. Yeah.
I was talking with a teacher today, and he was saying what happens now is you get 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds coming and saying, being encouraged to write an opinion, you know, share your opinion on this. And you think, I'm not interested in your opinion. You're 9. You need to learn something. You know, you need to learn the wisdom that's been passed down for generations. Then I'm interested in your opinion. But to come to say to young people, that's all that matters. Yeah, it ties up for sure. But Gavin, your piece was brilliant in the Catholic Herald, and you've said quite a lot about it here, but it's definitely worth going to read that.
Thank you.
If it's a choice between that and the so-called Archbishop of York.
He's a Leon Seaboy as well. He's from the same place as I am. But
I think we've got time just briefly then to go to the article you wrote, Mark, if you'd like to tell us a bit about this, which is a story that broke in Italy, and you've brought it here and written about it for the Herald, which is about this priest, Father Rupnik. Yeah,
Slovenian priest who was part of this. It was like the spiritual director for this congregation of nuns, this group of nuns in Slovenia 20 years ago, and there was like ongoing sort of abuse allegations coming out of it, and I think it was swept under the rug to a large extent. Like the report that I did in the Herald was just a report, because this is the sort of thing that can be quite dangerous. But basically now it's come to light because it seems like his ministry has been suppressed. The Jesuits have confirmed that, but he's carried on. Basically, he's carried on in public ministry because he's the guy who did the three-eyed Jesus, the horrible thing for the. Oh, yeah. Did you see that horrible? I mean, if you wanted an idea that there was something wrong with him, you only had to look at that. Really, I thought. So it's interesting. One of the interesting things about it is that there's also been some reports from Steubenville, sadly, the Catholic University, the Franciscan University. And I think it's, I just wanted to sort of say that we tend to sort of cling to our ideologies, our preferred ideologies, and say, well, that's because they're liberals, or that's because they're trads, or, you know, whatever faction you want to. But abuse doesn't work that way. Abuse crosses all these boundaries. And these people will align themselves with whatever ideology gives them access to, you know, people to abuse, to vulnerable people, children, worst of all. And surely we've learned that lesson now, that it's, you know, it crosses all those boundaries. And Pope Francis said that in his interview. You know, it was hard to read what he said, but what he said was right about abuse. That he said that, you know, it goes on most of all in the family. This is where we see the most reported cases. And actually in the Catholic Church, the percentages are much lower than in society, you know, a fraction of a percent that we see in society. But the Pope said that is unacceptable. Just 1 case is unacceptable. And obviously it's the hypocrisy that highlights it. So despite the fact that the Pope says all these things, it then looks like he has got this penchant for letting people off and promoting people, and and the press don't seem particularly interested in pursuing any of these things. I mean, you can run them off your fingers now. Zanchetta, Grazi, Ricca, Coco Palmerio. God, he had a funny hat. Did you see his funny hat? Anyway. So yeah, he sort of surrounded himself with a big gang of them. And a lot of people have speculated that's because he finds them easy to manipulate. Maybe he's trying to rehabilitate them. I don't know. But it looks like this Rupnik, who was incarnated into Rome, then got involved, in this sort of high profile, doing paintings for different people. He's been very prolific in America, especially, and he's a Jesuit. And as a result of that, when he was apparently, Messi and Latino have reported that he was excommunicated as a result of the investigation into him, and Pope Francis quashed that excommunication. So
within half an hour. Incredible.
So not good news.
Not good news, unfortunately. So we began with good news and we've ended with not such good news. But such is life. We continue to pray. I think we'll have to leave it there for now, and go and find a spiritual equivalent of gluing ourselves to the M25.
Well, Cardinal Muller's in London at the Oratory.
Yes.
Tomorrow night, so I'm going to be there. I don't know if we can get this out in time, but
I will try, but I can't actually. I'm doing some work with Archbishop John Wilson, so I'd like to be there. It's Cardinal Muller or Archbishop John Wilson.
You do, in demand.
But yeah, hopefully you'll report back to us on that. Yeah.
It's a long way to cycle from the Welsh marches as well, isn't it, Gavin?
Yes, it would be a very long way. It would indeed. Yes, that's right. Although he's worth it, I hear.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, maybe we'll discuss that next week when we meet again. Right. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please continue to do so and share and subscribe and everything else. And I have been and still am Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Thank you for listening. God bless you.